We begin with Dr. Cornel West. He is a professor of religion as well as the director of Afro-American Studies at Princeton. He's also known as a brilliant social critic with insights into topics as diverse as racism and popular culture. His latest book, which is being published on the anniversary of the LA riots, is called Race Matters, and I'm very pleased to have him back. Welcome.
Oh, it's good to be here.
Good to see you. Tell me, these are a series of essays that you have written. But if there is an essence here about race in America today, what is it?
I think in many ways it's reflected on this very day, which is the celebration of the birthday of the great Billie Holiday. She would have been 78 years old. And I think in the life and in the art of Billie Holiday, we see the triumph of the human spirit as it struggles against adversity. And in many ways, that's a paradigm of the black condition in America since we first arrived. A very tragic but dignified struggle against adversity, struggle against overwhelming circumstances, and yet still able to hone out some stone of hope. And that's what that book is about. It's about hope.
What's the hope?
Well, the hope is primarily based on the small victories. The small victories in terms of the black love, black care, black joy that serves as a basis of loving others and allowing the possibilities of persons coming together to change and transform prevailing circumstances.
When you look at the Rodney, taking you to timely events, this second trial of Rodney King, this trial in which the prosecution has evidently done a better job than it did in the first time. Do you fear the consequences because no one knows what a jury's going to do this time?
Well, it's hard to say, though, Charlie, though I must say that the distinction between what some persons would call a more visible riot, rebellion, or upheaval, as opposed to the quiet riot, which is occurring this very moment in South Central, occurring this very moment in Harlem here in New York, it's occurring this very moment in South Central and East LA, it's occurring in Appalachia. That is to say, the hurt, the misery, the suffering. And oftentimes we act as if that is not already in place, and it is. The tears are actually already flowing, as it were. So that the distinction between a quiet riot, which is occurring at this very moment, and a more visible rebellion or riot or upheaval is, for me, an important distinction, but it's a distinction that ought not to lead us to overlook the degree to which the conditions are still the same.
Why do you think that white America was startled by the rage in L.A.?
I think partly because we've lived through a kind of ice age under Reagan and Bush. And what I mean by that is it has rendered so much of black and brown, but especially black, social misery invisible. And by rendering that social misery invisible, persons are surprised as they have fallen asleep in their own kind of complacency. And to see the rage and fury and the anger articulated was a wake-up call to the degree to which persons had in fact slumbered and fallen into a complacence. And began to think that maybe we had reached a kind of rough justice in this country, and we know that's certainly not the case.
You mentioned the two previous Republican presidents. Do you think that this Democrat from Arkansas has done something in terms of both his campaign and his early presidency to overcome some of the cynicism?
I think he certainly attempted to create a new atmosphere, and it's very difficult to do. I mean, he can't get a job bill through Congress because of Republican placating. Right. Exactly. So that I think he's attempted to create a new atmosphere, but there's some very strong and deep conservative residues there, not just in the Congress.
In Clinton, or
he's,
in
no, he's fighting against it.
Yeah, but at the same time, Randall Robinson was here last night, and I suspect a man that you respect clearly for what he's done for Nelson Mandela and head of executive director of Trans-Africa. And he said that the policies of this country and this president with respect to Haitian refugees and with respect to democracy in Africa and with respect to the recognition of government in Angola, racist.
Well, it's a continuation of the Bush administration, and I think that certainly one of the major Achilles heel of the Clinton administration has been precisely the hypocrisy regarding the issue of the Haitians. There's no doubt about that. Certainly, I would say in regard to policy regarding in regard to African countries as a whole, there's still been a downfall and a shortcoming in this regard. So I would want to share Randall Robinson's concern, but at the same time, I would argue that on domestic issues, he's trying to turn the country around.
Mainly by changing the economic.
Well, most importantly, mainly by talking about the revitalization of the public sphere.
Of the public sphere.
The public sphere, from public
in terms of a role of government and a positive and
public health care, public provision.
A role of government to influence how we treat and how we respond to those who suffer the most.
That's right. That's right. And at this point, it's been primarily a rhetoric with some policies in place, but he's up against a lot, and it takes a while to turn a country around. And then at the same time, we still have the cultural decay. We still have the misery and the suffering that I alluded to earlier.
Do you find anything that resonates with you? I know you from many. I think you've probably been on this broadcast as much as any other single individual since I've been on the air. Mm-hmm. Do you think, and I know you because for you are a proud member of, consider yourself and characterize yourself as a social democrat or labels a hard or democratic socialist.
That's right.
Mainly based on the European model, I guess, that we would find in France and in other places.
Well, one concerned about redistribution of wealth.
Okay.
That's right.
Having said that, does anything that African-American conservatives say resonate with you at all? Those who want to see Black America do well by grabbing a piece of the American dream and making capitalism work for them? Does anything there that you can say?
You see, Black conservatives, they get a lot of mileage out of a notion that all Black freedom fighters have affirmed, which is the notion of Black self-help, Black self-development. Right. And no one would be against Black self-help.
Malcolm X was for that, wasn't he? Malcolm X was much more of that than he was.
Muhammad, right down the line.
But Malcolm specifically, because he's such a hero to so many African Americans, clearly was articulating something like that. I mean, you could even argue, I guess some might, that he was a forerunner of, notwithstanding some of the elements of it.
Right, but I mean, but what I think Brother Malcolm understood and the Black conservatives do not is that you cannot overlook the degree to which white supremacy shapes and molds the circumstances and conditions under which Black self-help and Black self-development can take place. And I would add male supremacy, I would add economic inequality. Right. But certainly when it comes to emphasizing Black self-help, and conservatives often think they have a monopoly on such a notion, and they're wrong.
What's your criticism of liberals in America and in their analysis of race in America?
Well, I think the problem often is that liberals at times tend to be spineless milquetoast, which is to say that they're not
paternalistic.
The degree to which they act on their convictions is often quite weak, and that they refuse to acknowledge the degree to which America remains so deeply shaped by corporate elites and bank elites in this country. The liberals think that somehow the distribution of wealth in place can provide the background conditions for inclusion of others, so that the pie would get bigger, so that economic growth by means of corporate priority can remain in place. And I think liberals are at times allies. At times they're unreliable allies. So I don't want to just whitewash them, as it were. But you've got to proceed quite cautiously with liberals.
Boy, they're not going to like to hear you say that. No, that brings me to a question I've asked before, and I don't want to go too far down this road, but just raise this point. You seem to be out of sync with where the world is. The world seems to me, I mean, socialism is not doing well. Look at France recently, for example, in terms of one national election. Secondly, I mean, even in the former communist countries, everybody is saying, give us a piece of that old-time market economy. right?
Oh, yes. I mean, I keep in mind that democratic socialists have always been major critics of any kind of communist regime.
No,
major critics
communism is not the issue. The issue is an unfettered market economy.
Oh, yes, but we know the market's not unfettered.
Okay.
Right? We know the corporate America will get subsidies and free equipment and free technology and so forth. So if we're going to talk about public provisions for certain spheres of our society, certainly we have to talk about the cozy relationships between various corporate elites and the political elites.
Like Ross Perot there.
Well, I mean, Ross has a point, though he gives it a more conservative populist twist.
Yeah.
But he certainly has a point in terms of the lobbyists who are hired primarily by corporations to push through policies that are efficacious for their own interests. But let me say this, though, Charlie, that you are absolutely right in terms of my not being in step with most of the world.
Right.
Because when I look at
Bosnia,
when I look at India, when I look at South Africa, when I look at Haiti, when I look at Chile, I see human suffering that is changeable and alterable.
Well, then let's take that, though.
And I think that the fight against such injustice is an honorable one and a self-critical and humble.
Okay, but you also could mention Somalia, where there is clearly an effort to make a difference there.
Yes, I can mention my own Ethiopia.
Yeah.
You see? How you like these cufflinks?
From Ethiopia.
My wife just brought them. Yes,
do
indeed.
you think, are you pessimistic about the future?
No.
You're optimistic?
No.
Where are you?
I'm full of hope.
Full of hope, okay.
Against the grain.
And faith.
Faith, in spite of sensibility, as it were. The evidence points to sliding down a slippery slope of chaos, anarchy.
What's the politics of conversion?
The politics of conversion is an attempt to rechannel powers and energies of ordinary people so that they believe they can make a difference, and if they come together, they can expand the scope of democracy.
And what brings them together?
What will bring them together will be, 1, new leadership, 2, new belief in themselves, and 3, new historical conjunctures, new moments that provide new possibilities which are unpredictable, which as we turn around the corner, when we turn around the corner, we see things that we could not have imagined, you see.
Like?
It was hard to say. It's like Abraham Joshua Heschel's notion of radical amazement. And I suggest in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to be radically amazed at the degree to which people who keep track of the least of these, keep track of those persons who are suffering, the new possibilities to provide some way of alleviating that suffering, you see. But that's hope. That's not optimism. I'm not an optimist at all. In fact, I have little respect for naive optimism. The world's too tragic to be a naive optimist.
What does your deep religious belief say to you when you look at what's going on in Bosnia and you see that kind of cruelty and inhumanity and what some are characterizing as genocide and crimes against humanity? And it's not just happening there. There are other places in the world it's taking place.
I see it in South Central Los Angeles or Harlem as well.
And that's...
Well, as you know, this is the Easter season. I speak as a Christian. I look at the world through the eyes of the cross, and I see the blood that flows. I see the death with no dignity. I see the soldiers making fun of the person who died. I see the loss of hope. I see the darkness twice on that Good Friday. And yet, even given that Saturday with Easter possibilities seemingly foreclosed and held at arm's length, and yet the small victories. Right? Those who get up every morning, love their children, project a future, those who organize, local activists who are struggling against the grain, the Davids against the Goliaths.
But let me stop you there in terms of your Christian soul. Where should the United States, in some call of justice and morality and being on the side of all that is good, say to the world, we will not stand by and allow this?
In Bosnia?
Yes.
Yes, should have done it a year ago.
With American military leading the way.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And make the argument, though, when people say it's a quagmire, it'll suck you in and never let you go and will create division in this country, like we've never seen before if American men and women are dying there in a way that our leaders cannot clearly articulate the national interest, albeit how incredibly obscene and vicious and undescribable the crimes.
Yes, but see, I would argue that that one does not fight Hitler based on national interest. You don't fight apartheid based on natural interest.
You fight it on the basis of what?
You fight it on the basis of, one, it being wrong, two, of it destabilizing the region, leading toward wider conflict, and three, allowing brutes and tyrants to get away with such gross dehumanization, such ugly behavior toward others on all three levels. And I think if we had done this about 12 months ago, we could have done it simply with either airstrikes and making symbolic gestures saying we will not allow it.
You mean even that?
Now, at this point, of course, we're talking about long-term investment. We're talking about American soldiers and so forth. So you're absolutely right. It
and
makes
some
it a
say
much
it'll
more
take
difficult.
200,000 or 300,000.
Some say even 500,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, some say 500,000.
Doesn't sound like Vietnam to you.
No, I don't think the analogy holds there. But I mean, I recognize the strength of the plausible arguments on the other side. I think we need to have a public conversation about this. We need a debate about this. But certainly,
do you think we're having that public conversation?
No, we haven't had a serious public conversation.
And who's to follow? It seems to me that there's one person that commands the debate, you know. And politics rules, though, because you may not want to have that debate right now because there are other items on the agenda. And each day, more people die because there are other agendas to pursue, whether they're, you know, not, and you don't want to cloud the agendas.
Right.
I mean, I think
that's
too many things
what
on
has
the
happened
table.
in the Clinton administration. Very much so. Very much so.
Tell me about black nihilism and what it is.
It is the black hopelessness and meaninglessness and, most importantly, lovelessness that too many black people and especially black children are undergoing this very moment. The shattering of family and neighborhood, the proliferation of combat zones and existential wastelands that too many black folk are up against. Almost 50% of black children live in poverty in this country. What kind of future are we talking about, you see? And the most frightening thing, I think, is that denialism leads toward a certain kind of cold-heartedness and mean-spiritedness. If, in fact, no one feels that my life is worth any value, why should I value the life of others? And it spills over in the forms of social chaos that I think sit at the very center of the chocolate cities in this society. As the
What's a chocolate city?
A chocolate city is a black and brown city. It's a New York, it's a Chicago, it's a Detroit, it's a Washington city disproportionately black and brown. Vanilla suburb, those suburbs that are disproportionately white, those work in the city during the day and go back to the vanilla suburbs at night.
Should Jesse Jackson be elected head of the NAACP?
My own view is no. I have great respect for Jesse Jackson. I think he's one of the towering figures of the black freedom movement in the 20th century. I think NAACP would actually stranglehold the brother. I think he has too much to offer. The NAACP itself is in need of tremendous regeneration, new vision, new energy. He could do that, but I think that Jesse Jackson simply is someone who could be much more useful outside of the NAACP apparatus. I'd like to see him senator from the new state called Washington, D.C. That's where I'd like to see.
I suspect that's where he'd like to be either.
Brother Jesse, yeah.
Finally, when you look at you, let me listen to this. This is from Senator Bill Bradley talking about this book. The book is Race Matters by Cornel West, professor. Few Americans speak about race with Cornel West's clarity, humanity, intellectual rigor. His presence on the scene, plus the knowledge that his best years lie ahead of him, should give hope to all of us who believe that America's racial diversity is our strength. Marion Wright Edelman says Cornel West is one of the most original, brilliant, prophetic, and healing voices in America today. We ignore his truth in Race Matters at our personal and national peril. And it goes on with other people, including Henry Gates at Harvard and Janetta Cole at Spelman College. Have you paid any price for all the attention that you have received? Any price? Has there been a toll for that?
Oh, sure. Being misunderstood, and this is what one would expect, because when you're saying so many different kinds of things, you're often misunderstood, and you're often cast with the mainstream when you're much more critical of the mainstream, and you're cast with militants when you're much more open to compromise. I have a strongly militant pole to my own position. I also have a compromising pole given my personality. So that I think probably more than anything else, it's a matter of being misunderstood, and that misunderstanding leads to and degenerates to a whole host of other things. But I'm very conscious of becoming too visible, because I want to keep the focus on the issues, on the social misery and the suffering. You see what I mean? And I'm quite serious about that. I think that televisual culture can become a kind of addiction. It can become almost a narcotic. And I do believe
You mean the hot lights?
The hot lights, and yes. And I think...
And all the praise in the papers.
Publicity and power are inherently corrupting, and therefore one must tremendously struggle against it and be spiritually prepared such that you don't fall into the traps of complacency and acceptance. And that's a perennial battle for a freedom fighter, it seems to me. And it's a challenge for someone like myself.
Great to have you here.
Good to see you again.
Thank you.
Congratulations on you going national.
Thank you.
I'm so glad of it.
Cornel West, Race Matters is his book, and it is provocative and insightful ideas about where America is going with, as he says, some respect for the power of love. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Catherine McKinnon is here, and Mary Steenburgen. See you after this break.